Hello and welcome to Auto Shenanigans. How the devil are you? Have you had a good week? My name is John. Thank you very much for joining me for another exciting Great British Road journey. This week I've come to Lincolnshire, one of the largest counties in England. The north of the county is more up north than Sheffield and it reaches as far to the south as Stamford. It's known for the Lincolnshire sausage, but unfortunately for Lincolnshire, the recipe is basic and used all over, meaning there isn't actually an official Lincolnshire sausage produced exclusively in the county. That county is mostly flat. There is one hill, and despite its size, the rest of us have only ever heard of Lincoln. The rest of its towns are a mystery. So it's fortunate that we've got my 1923 Michelin guidebook to help with navigating our way along a journey that starts in Stamford and ends in Skegness. In addition to the guidebook, we'll also be using period-correct maps to help get about and stopping in to look at many things. We start then in Stamford, a small town that's doubled in size since the days of my guidebook, from 10 to 20,000 residents, and in places it all looks rather lovely, but then it should do because Stamford alone is home to over 600 Grade 2 listed properties. Back in the 1960s, it was decided that we'd start preserving and looking after some of our older buildings and architecture by giving them what's called a listed status. In simple terms, this means the building has to remain as per its original design, but in Stamford they perhaps went a bit overboard and designated the entire town as an area of special interest. This has resulted in hundreds of listed properties, and Stamford accounts for more than half of the listed properties in Lincolnshire. One such listed building is Brown's Hospital, which my guidebook suggests we should visit, although it says gratuity is expected. I assume today some sort of voluntary donation is required for entry, which is why I'm stood outside. The hospital, that doesn't look like a hospital, was built in 1475 using funds given by William Brown, a rich wool merchant based in Stamford. It wasn't set up as the sort of hospital that we're familiar with, and now that I think about it, I don't even know why it's called Brown's Hospital, because it was built as an almshouse. This is something that we've seen before. This is a building for providing low-cost social housing, not a place for doctors and surgeons. To get to our next destination, we'll be heading out of Stamford via the A1175, but looking at our old maps, we should be calling it the A16, and indeed, this section of A1175 used to make up the southern part of the A16, but things changed when a new road was built from Peterborough to Spalding, which was designated as the A16, meaning the old A16 became the A1175. As we drive along, we'll pass through the village of Tallington, where we need to use a railway level crossing. And it's said to be one of the worst level crossings in the country because the railway traffic is so frequent it causes massive delays on the A1175. Not only that, there's been several occasions where faults have occurred on the level crossing, resulting in the gates being closed for hours at a time, which of course buggers up the surrounding road network. The residents of Tallington Village, the people who have to deal with this on a daily basis, have been campaigning for years to have a relief road built or some sort of alternative bridge. And in fact, a solution has been on the cards since the 1950s, but so far, nothing. A short distance from the level crossing is the town of Market Deeping. It's certainly changed a lot over the years. In the days of my guidebook, it had a population of only 900, but today that's risen to well over 6,000. What makes this middle-of-nowhere town so popular? Well, I don't know, and my guidebook suggests that we take a visit to see Northborough Manor House, which isn't even in Market Deeping. In fact, we have to cross over the county lines in order to see it, so thus we must conclude that Market Deeping is a very boring place indeed. But what of Northborough Manor House itself? Well, it was sometimes referred to as a castle, so that's cool, but like Oakham Castle, see last week's video, it wasn't really a castle and would be considered more of a fortified manor house. It was built in the 1330s, and its most striking feature is the gatehouse entrance, which apparently is rented out as a holiday let. But let's get back to Lincolnshire. And our next stop is the town of Spalding, which requires a bit of messing around with the route because whilst today we can drive onto the A16 bypass around Spalding, in the old days this didn't exist, so we'll need to take a left turn onto the B1172, which used to be one of the main roads into Spalding. This will take us along the River Welland, and wait a minute, is that an old railway bridge? It sure is, buddy, and with a public footpath running alongside the bridge, we can get up close for a proper look. The bridge was part of a branch line railway that opened in 1867 between Spalding and March. It seems the trains would be running on this railway right up until the 1980s, but today, not so much because the railway's been removed. My guidebook, which I've left in the car, suggests when visiting Spalding, why not take a trip to see Ace Coffee Hall? Ace Coffee Hall, I don't know on this one, your guess is as good as mine, but why not indeed? It's a large house with 5 acres of gardens that was built in the 15th century. It was lived in right the way up until 1896, yet despite having multiple occupants, the building remains mostly unchanged. The building was handed over to the town of Spalding in 1902, and over the years it saw various uses until it was turned into a museum about the local area. Speaking of the local area, the town of Spalding is built on reclaimed land. It used to be underwater, but what this means is that the town is prone to flooding. The most severe of which would occur in 1947 when, during stormy weather, flood defences failed a few miles to the south of Spalding near a village called Crowland. Thousands and thousands of acres were flooded and the town of Spalding found itself submerged under 2 feet of water. If you live in a town, you'll know that this is suboptimal, and in 1953 they constructed the Coronation Channel, a huge canal that runs around the town of Spalding, the idea being that during storms and floods the water would be diverted around the town, and it seems to have done the trick. Moving on from Spalding and looking at the map, to get to Boston, the A16 offers a near-perfect straight road directly into the town. Unfortunately, we can't use it because that's not in keeping with our period-correct maps, where we notice that the A16 instead meanders its way through several small villages. There's no sign of a nice straight road anywhere, so after much messing around, we arrive in the centre of Boston, where we find St Botolph's or St Botolph's Church, as recommended in my guidebook. It's a medieval church that claims to have one of the tallest towers found on any medieval church in the country at 81 metres. For centuries it's been a landmark of Boston, and in days of old would have been useful as a navigational aid for boats and fishermen because in the right conditions it's visible for miles. The church is around 700 years old and remarkably is still open for church stuff if you so wish. There's another old thing that's still operating a short distance from here, so let's take a wander over there. This is Maud Foster Windmill, a 7-storey high structure that was constructed in 1819. Excluding its sails, which uniquely there are 5, it stands at 25 metres tall, making it one of the largest working windmills in the country, although it very nearly wasn't. It had to be saved. In 1948, the original mill company that owned it would close and the windmill fell into a state of disrepair. It was somewhat saved by the great-grandson of the original mill company owner, who in 1953 funded some essential repair works on the windmill, but the real rescue would come in 1987 when it was purchased and fully restored back to working order. Today it operates as a windmill, and it mills things, and it does so using the original mill machinery from the 1800s. Fascinating. From Boston we're going to head up the A52, which, looking at the old maps, is also the A52, so good, this should be a bit more straightforward. And does anybody else think this part of Lincolnshire is a bit boring? It's just farms and fields as far as the eye can see. So with that in mind, we're going to turn off the A52 in search of something a little less boring, and I think I've found something. Yeah, I have, and it's a weapons testing range. It's known as, or it was known as, RAF Wayne Fleet, and out there somewhere on the shores of the Wash, they carried out aircraft weapons testing and bombing practice runs. The site opened way back in 1890 when it was used for testing artillery. Aircraft would start to use the site as of 1938, and they'd practice on targets like old ships, which, if you take a look at some aerial photos, you can spot the remains of some of these practice ships, although these ones are probably a bit more recent because the site was still in use up until 2009. Interestingly, there was a control tower constructed which would oversee the site's operations, and it looks exactly like an aircraft control tower, just without all of the runways. It still survives to this day, and if you wanted to, you could spend the night there because it's now open as a hotel of sorts. A short distance from RAF Wayne Fleet is this small section of abandoned road. It used to be part of the main road or the A52, but as is often the case, in more recent times the road was realigned to make it smoother and straighter and therefore safer, leaving behind this piece of abandoned road in the process. It's interesting actually, because if you look at where the road used to be routed, it really was a stupid twisty section, so it seems reasonable to have straightened it out. Our next stop sees us in Wayne Fleet itself, which in the days of my guidebook, despite its small size, was a very busy town indeed due to its 2 river connections and railway connections. That said, whilst it was a busy town no doubt, there were only around 1,200 residents living here, a number that hasn't increased all that much, and today there are 1,600 people living in the town. My guidebook suggests that we might like to take a look at Wayne Fleet's Market Cross, or what remains of it anyway. It was built in the medieval times, so it's quite old and consists of a few steps, a post and a weather vane. Market crosses are quite commonplace throughout towns in the UK, but unlike this one in Wayne Fleet, they're usually rebuilt or turned into something else, but this one still remains pretty much as per the medieval CAD drawing. Just across the street from Market Cross is Stores, an automotive supply shop with a petrol station built into it, and believe it or not, in the early days of petrol stations, this was a fairly common thing. The way it worked is that you'd park up outside in the road and the petrol filling hose would reach over the footpath, allowing you to fill your car, although in those days it wasn't self-service like it is today. Today, you'd never get away with building such a setup. Health and safety would shut it down immediately. I can only assume that the health and safety executive hasn't bothered to visit Wayne Fleet because this petrol station in a shop is still open for business. And just like that, we arrive at our final destination, which today is Skegness, or Skeggy. It doesn't really matter how you say it, it sounds like a disease. My guidebook suggests that we might like to visit St Clement's Church or Winthorpe Church, and that sounds delightful, but Skegness is a failing English seaside town, and there are only 3 things that you do at failing English seaside towns. Number 1, visit the pier. Skegness is cheating with theirs a little bit. Whilst the original 1800s wooden pier still exists, although a lot shorter than it once was, they bolted on a much more modern addition, but over land, so I'm not really sure that counts. Anyway, now that you're at the pier, it is essential to play 2p coin slot machines until you lose at least £30. Number 3, fish and chips. You must be f***ing joking. This is more like it. Number 3, fish and chips, and then we'll go and have a fight with some seagulls.
Aye, get back here.
And you're done. The beauty with this method is that it can be repeated at all of England's failing seaside towns, including your favourites such as Cromer, Great Yarmouth and Southend-on-Sea.
Are you in Skegness or Chernobyl? You just don't know.
And there we are then, guys. That's all we've got time for this week. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you liked the video. If you did, there is of course a button specifically for that, and if you haven't subscribed already, please consider doing so. That'll be wicked sweet awesome. Enjoy the rest of your week, whatever it is you get up to. My name's John. You've been watching Auto Shenanigans, and I'll see you guys next time for another exciting Great British Road Journey. Until then, take care. Bye bye.